long before she ever stepped into a boardroom, before her name was etched onto glass doors and startup newsletters. Nia Clark stood behind the counter of a grocery store on the south side of Chicago, punching in barcodes beneath flickering fluorescent lights. The apron hung loose around her frame, the name tag scratched from too many shifts. Customers barely looked her in the eye. Managers shouted instructions without listening to her answers. The beeping scanner became a rhythm she hated and depended on, the sound of survival. She was 22, overqualified, and overlooked. Her degree in business management sat somewhere in a shoebox back in her mother's apartment, alongside old report cards and broken pens from exam days. She had graduated top of her class, interned at a mid-tier consultancy, even got a reference letter once that called her disarmingly efficient. But every door she knocked on opened halfway, then slammed shut. Sometimes they didn't open at all. Her name on a resume was met with silence. Her voice in interviews was politely redirected. And when she got interviews at all, they asked if she was sure she didn't want a role in HR instead of strategy. She said yes to jobs she didn't want because rent didn't wait for dreams. At night, she didn't sleep. She planned. In the cramped corner of her shared bedroom, beneath a desk lamp missing its shade, she sketched business ideas in spiral notebooks, page after page of diagrams, cash flow models, branding notes, competitive analyses, startups that never got funded, services no one believed in, an app for local logistics, a hiring platform designed for underrepresented communities, a seat-to-shelf supply chain model for Black-owned food brands. No one invested, no one replied, but she kept writing. Every rejection hardened her resolve. Every cold email that bounced, every VC that ghosted, every mentor who turned out to be more interested in her potential than her pitch. All of it became fuel. She watched people less prepared get further faster, watched ideas she'd birthed show up months later in other people's decks. But she never called it theft. She called it proof. If they were stealing, it meant she was building value. She worked odd jobs, tutored math, managed social media accounts for a cousin's boutique, saved every dime, skipped nights out, ate from dollar menus and lived like someone in training, not for fame but for freedom. At 25, she filed her first LLC, Clark Strategies. She ran it from a public library. The Wi-Fi cut out every 20 minutes. Still, she made it work. Her first client was a barbershop that needed help with scheduling, then a daycare that needed help with invoices, then a small vegan cafe that she helped triple their revenue with 2 Instagram ads and a new supplier contract. Word spread. Slowly, quietly. She wasn't flashy, and she didn't pitch herself as a savior. Just someone who understood structure, margins, and scale. At 26, she was approached by 3 friends from business school who wanted to build a delivery app for underserved neighborhoods, the kind of zones major apps ignored. They had the energy, the coding skills, the network, but they had no business model. They asked her to write one. She didn't. She rewrote the entire company, created the launch blueprint, outlined the marketing strategy, defined the KPIs, negotiated their first partnership. And when the money came in, they tried to pay her in equity, 1.5% with no voting rights. She walked, then built her own. Same concept, better design, clearer ethics. She called it Drop Scale. Within a year, it launched in 3 cities. Within 2, it was profitable. Not booming, not viral, but steady, strong, real. By 30, she had moved into a 1-bedroom loft. No more roommates, no more shared fridges. Still no flash. She wore the same jacket she'd worn at the grocery store. Still used the same notebook from her tutoring days. But now she had a team. 10 people. Then 25. Mostly Black. Mostly women. Mostly told no before. Nia didn't build for optics. She built for impact. And still, when she walked into rooms of investors or vendors or regulators, they asked her where the CEO was. She always answered the same way. Right here. The hallway outside the investor conference room smelled of stale coffee and tension. Nia leaned against the cold marble wall, flipping through her notes one last time, though she didn't need to. The pitch was etched into her memory, 32 slides, time transitions, projected burn rate, acquisition targets, expansion plan. She had practiced the delivery to exhaustion, standing in her apartment at midnight rehearsing the pauses, the eye contact, the micro-expressions that would make her look confident but not too assertive. Ambitious but not threatening. Serious but still approachable. It was a language she had been forced to learn, the dialect of venture capital rooms that were rarely designed for women like her. The doors opened. A young assistant, clipboard in hand, gestured her in without looking up. The boardroom was all glass and ego-sweeping views of the skyline, walnut table longer than a limousine, and chairs already filled with sharp suits, neutral tones, and expressions carved from stone. She introduced herself. Half the room looked surprised. The other half looked bored. One man adjusted his tie and said, "We thought you were bringing your CEO." She didn't correct him. She simply connected her laptop, clicked the first slide, and began. Her voice didn't waver. Her numbers didn't stutter. Every metric she presented was sourced, cited, projected. She anticipated their questions and answered them before they could speak. She pivoted seamlessly from operations to market share to brand voice. And when she ended the presentation, she didn't ask for money. She offered them the opportunity to come on board if they were aligned. The room stayed silent for a second too long. Then someone cleared his throat and said, "You're impressive. But this kind of operation might need a little more experience at the top." She smiled politely. And left. No follow-ups. No repitches. No compromises. 3 months later, one of those same men emailed asking to buy in. She tripled the valuation and sent back the term sheet. He never replied. But she kept the receipt. By the time Dropscale expanded into its 6th city, media outlets started taking notice. Not just for the app's logistics or community-driven supply chains, but for the founder herself. She became the subject of op-eds with headlines like, "Is this the face of the future of tech?" and "Black Female CEO Disrupting Without Permission." Interviews flooded in. She declined most. Not because she feared exposure, but because she knew the stories they wanted to write about the unlikely entrepreneur, that against all odds narrative. They never wrote those pieces about Stanford grads with seed capital from their fathers. They wrote them about her. She didn't need the story. She was the company. And yet, the boardroom battles never stopped. When she hired a CFO, some vendors automatically emailed him instead of her. When she walked into meetings with her CTO, a younger white man, the clients addressed him first. Once at a conference, a competitor tried to introduce her to her own assistant, assuming Nia was the support staff. She didn't raise her voice. She raised her portfolio. When a vendor tried to cut corners on a contract, she bought out their entire supply chain. When a logistics firm claimed her delivery routes were unscalable, she engineered a tracking algorithm that reduced their own route costs by 19%, then licensed it back to them. She didn't fight bias with fire. She fought it with results so sharp they couldn't be ignored. But inside, she carried the scars. Not the kind anyone could see, but the micro-fractures that come from years of being told to stand near greatness, but never in it. Of being asked to advise, but never lead. Of being quoted, but not credited. So when the time came to move Dropscale headquarters into its new downtown tower, she chose the top floor not for the view, but for the boardroom. She had one built-in matte black with a custom seat at the head. Not bigger, but heavier. Etched into its steel spine were the words, "This seat is not reserved. It's earned." And no one would ever forget it. The storm hit just before dawn. Not the kind that shook windows or flooded streets, but the kind that brewed behind closed doors, the quiet collapse of partnerships, the fraying edges of trust. And the kind of political maneuvering that usually starts with a whisper in a hallway and ends with a public statement nobody saw coming. Nia woke to a flood of messages. Subject lines like, "You should see this. Thoughts on board memo? Urgent, press already has it." She sat up in bed, the city skyline still dark through the windows, and read the words over and over again. Effective immediately, the board will appoint an interim executive advisor to assist the CEO in scaling operations beyond current capacity. They didn't mention her name. They didn't have to. The implication was clear. They were bringing in oversight. They were suggesting she'd hit her ceiling. The irony burned. The same board that once praised her vision, that toasted to her projections, that rode her growth into national relevance, now quietly questioned her fitness to lead. Not because the numbers slipped. They hadn't. Not because the product failed. It didn't. But because her presence, her control, had grown uncomfortable. Too central. Too visible. Too black. Too woman. She didn't panic. She didn't call anyone. She showered, dressed in her usual slate gray suit, and walked into the building she had built from the basement up. The elevator ride to the top floor was slow, deliberate. She watched her reflection in the mirrored steel, noted the tension in her shoulders, the stillness in her eyes. The conference room was already filled. 12 seats. 11 men. One woman who wouldn't meet her gaze. And one empty chair at the head of the table. She walked in, set her notebook on the table, and sat without speaking. The chair didn't creak. It accepted her. One of the men, Greg Halvorsen, an old money investor with legacy tech stock and soft hands, cleared his throat and began with the usual performative concern. "We just want to make sure the company's evolving responsibly." She nodded slowly, then opened her notebook. On the page were numbers: quarterly growth, user retention, delivery optimization, regional penetration. She read them aloud, then paused, then closed the notebook. If this were any other company, she said, with a founder delivering these results, this conversation wouldn't be happening. No one argued. They couldn't. Instead, Greg pivoted. "It's just about vision at scale." She smiled, tired but firm. "This is my vision." "At scale?" Silence again. But one by one, eyes fell to the table. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She made it plain: if they wanted to restructure the leadership, they could do it without her. And without her, the platform wouldn't stand. The contracts, the partnerships, the city negotiations all rested on relationships she'd built personally. Her leverage wasn't theoretical. It was operational. She stood. "Make a choice," she said. "Me. Or your comfort." Then she left. No storming out. No slammed doors. Just exit. The message rippled through the company. Employees rallied. Letters poured in. Hashtags trended. Hashtag keep Nia. Hashtag built by her. Hashtag not your interim. Clients threatened to pull out. Investors panicked. And in less than 72 hours, the board folded. Issued a retraction. Praised her leadership. Begged for forgiveness privately, of course. She returned the following Monday. Same chair. Same notebook. Same silence. She began the meeting without acknowledging the event. Because leadership isn't about who says the most. It's about who moves the most and never needs to explain it. By the time the fiscal year closed, Dropscale had expanded to 15 major markets and crossed its first $100 million in revenue. Headlines finally stopped referring to Nia Clark as an unlikely CEO and started calling her what she had always been: visionary. But the titles meant nothing to her. She didn't chase validation. She built architecture. In the quiet hours before dawn, she sat alone in her corner office. Lights off, the only glow coming from her tablet as she reviewed logistics reports and plotted expansion into international markets. Her team had grown to over 200 employees. Offices in Atlanta, Oakland, Minneapolis, and a new facility in Johannesburg were underway. But with growth came a new kind of pressure: visibility. And with visibility came expectation. She wasn't just building a company anymore. She was becoming the symbol of something bigger. Every time she appeared in public, a podcast, a keynote, a news segment, she wasn't just Nia. She was the black woman in charge. A stand-in for every woman who'd been silenced in meetings, overlooked in interviews, or used as cover without ever being heard. It was a weight she never asked for, but one she bore with unflinching precision. At a global startup conference in Lisbon, she arrived to speak on a panel titled "Leadership in the New Economy." When she reached backstage, the organizer greeted her with a clipboard and a question. "Are you here to set up for one of the executives?" She didn't flinch. She simply pointed to the stage monitor where her name was displayed in bold: Nia Clark, CEO, Dropscale. The woman's face turned crimson. Nia walked past her without a word. On stage, the panel moderator introduced the speakers: 3 men with seed-funded platforms and press teams, and Nia, the only one on stage whose company had turned profit. She sat on the far end of the couch. Not because she was last, but because she liked to observe. The questions, as always, were tilted. Do you feel a responsibility to represent others like you? Do you ever struggle with imposter syndrome? What advice would you give other women trying to find their voice? She answered each question calmly, precisely. Then, after a pause, she leaned into the mic and said, "If the room keeps asking why I'm in it, I'll keep building my own." The audience erupted. After the panel, a young woman approached her backstage, notebook trembling in her hand. She didn't speak. Just handed Nia a folded piece of paper. On it was a drawing: a girl standing on top of a building labeled Dropscale with the words "She built this" scrawled underneath. Nia kept that paper. Framed it in her office. Not for pride. For perspective. Because every time she sat at the head of that conference table, the one they once said wasn't hers, she wasn't just sitting for herself. She was sitting for all of them. The city was humming with a late summer heat that shimmered across the glass buildings like a mirage. From the 42nd floor of the Dropscale headquarters, Nia stood with one hand pressed against the cool window pane, her eyes scanning the streets below, not in awe, but in calculation. Every delivery route, every partner's storefront, every intersection her platform optimized daily was part of a map she had drawn by instinct and relentless iteration. Behind her, the office was quiet. Most of the executive team had left after the quarterly strategy meeting. The room still carried the scent of coffee and tension, the air dense with questions no one had dared to ask aloud. A merger was on the table, a billion-dollar opportunity that could fast-track global infrastructure, but one that came with strings. Too many strings. The acquiring firm was legacy. Old systems, old culture, all-white leadership, all-male board. And buried deep in the proposal's legal scaffolding was a clause that would quietly restructure Dropscale's leadership. Nia would retain her influence, but she'd no longer be CEO. Her title would shift to founder emeritus. A ceremonial seat. A sanitized exile. They offered golden language. Freedom. Flexibility. A future as a figurehead. She read the entire packet in silence, then closed it. She knew this play. They couldn't defeat her in public, couldn't out-execute her on metrics. So they'd try to elevate her into irrelevance, applaud her out of power. But Nia had never been built for decoration. That night, she held an emergency meeting with her legal team. By dawn, her response was drafted, signed, and sent, a counteroffer that not only rejected the merger but outlined a bold new expansion plan, one that would bring Dropscale into 10 new cities across Africa and Southeast Asia using their own capital, with no external control. The response hit the news cycle like thunder. Commentators called it reckless. Analysts called it emotional. But users, workers, and emerging leaders called it what it was: revolutionary. Within a week, a coalition of new funders, Black-led VC firms, grassroots fintech collectives, and international community investment networks stepped forward, not only to support the expansion, but to preserve her leadership. One night, sitting on her balcony with a glass of water and her favorite notebook open on her lap, she thought about power. Real power. Not the kind that came with offices and corner suites. Not the kind that came from men with legacy funds and thin smiles. But the kind that was earned, fought for in silence, claimed in rooms where she wasn't invited but showed up anyway. She remembered the conference room, the first time she was told, "This seat's reserved," and how now there wasn't a seat in the building she didn't own. But it wasn't enough to build her own chair anymore. She wanted to burn the whole map and redraw it from the ground up. A new framework for business where equity wasn't decoration, and CEOs didn't have to wear armor to survive. That month, she launched a side initiative, the Platform Project, a rolling accelerator for young founders from underrepresented communities. No equity grabs, no advisory strings, just mentorship, access, and capital on their terms. The first cohort had 16 members. 14 were women. All of them had been told they weren't ready. She told them, "You already are." By the time the fiscal year closed, Dropscale had crossed into 7 new countries. And Nia? She hadn't changed. Same hoodie under her blazer. Same worn-out notebook. Same silence before she spoke. But when she walked into boardrooms now, people didn't ask who she was. They rose. The invitation was handwritten. Thick cream paper, gold foil lettering, and a wax seal stamped with the emblem of a centuries-old business society known for honoring only the most elite minds in commerce, policy, and global influence. For years, Nia had been aware of it, the Laurentian Forum, a private circle of power where deals that shaped economies were brokered in back gardens and cigar rooms. She had never been invited. Until now. The card arrived with a simple note. "Your presence is requested. We believe it's time." She didn't smile when she read it. She didn't frame it or post it on social media. She just placed it on her desk, beside a stack of reports from the Platform Project and an email draft to her expansion director in Ghana. Recognition didn't move her. Ownership did. Still, she accepted the invitation. The event was held in a secluded villa outside Zurich, surrounded by pines and guarded like a vault. Inside were the usual suspects. Men in tailored silence, women with polished accents and calculated charm. Legacy billionaires, whispering heirs, new titans who mistook disruption for entitlement. Nia walked in alone. No entourage, no stylist, just a black suit, a braided crown, and the same leather notebook that had followed her from public libraries to million-dollar pitches. She wasn't a guest. She was a landmark. They tried to guide her to the back table. She declined and walked toward the front. At the head of the room was a seat, elevated, gold-rimmed, flanked by two smaller chairs. The kind they said was reserved for the keynote panel. She stepped to it. A man in a navy suit, clearly unsettled, leaned forward. "I think that seat's reserved for executives." Nia didn't respond. She simply opened her notebook, pulled a folded document from its pages, and placed it on the table. A portfolio outlining Dropscale's global reach, its impact data, its autonomous governance model, and a list of 400,000 jobs it had created across 9 countries. Then she said 5 words. "I'm not here to ask." Silence washed over the room like cold water. And then, one by one, the other executives, those who actually built things, who had seen her name echo across their industries, nodded. She sat, and the panel began. They asked her about scale. She spoke of trust. They asked her about legacy. She spoke of replication. They asked her what it meant to be a black woman in a space like this. She said, "I didn't come here to be one of you. I came here to make sure I'm never the last." And with that, she changed the tone of the entire gathering. Not through aggression, through precision. Not through performance, through permanence. She didn't dominate the conversation. She redirected it. Made room for the woman beside her, an agricultural innovator from Kenya who had been invited late. Highlighted a founder from Indonesia whose platform had outpaced American models in speed and scale. She passed the mic, then dismantled the need for one altogether. The event ended with a standing ovation. Not because of what she represented, but because of what she rewired. 2 months later, the same society voted to dissolve the tiered seating chart at all future events. The chairs, the elevations, the archaic hierarchies, all gone. In their place, a circle. At the center of that redesign, on the official architectural sketches, a quote etched into the floor where the old podium once stood. "No seat is reserved when you've built the building." Nia Clark. Back home, in the quiet of her apartment, she placed the Laurentian pin in a drawer and returned to her desk. A new email had come in, a pitch from a high school student in Baltimore who had created a micro-logistics system for underserved food banks. Nia didn't hesitate. She sent back funding. No press, no calls, no conditions. Just one line. "Let me know when you're ready to take your seat." Because the table wasn't the goal anymore. The blueprint was, and she had rewritten it in her own hand. Sharp, unshakable, and carved deep enough that no one could ever erase it again.